diversity of perspective
Yeah.
is the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
And there's a class issue kind of hand in hand with this as well. I mean,
Yes.
I come from a working class background. I was a scholarship kid growing up, so I was lucky. I got to go to a really good high school and junior high school because my mother worked extraordinarily hard to make sure I could go to this school.
Hmm.
And that afforded me a lot of opportunities, and it also gave me a pretty cross-cultural perspective, right? Like I was a kid who was learning about the Beatles in high school from my high school friends, and then listening to Run DMC when I went home from like my family.
It
So,
also gives you that sense of belonging, like you belong in the corridors of power. That I know this is something I've struggled with, is because I kind of went to a ghetto school.
mhm,
Um, Getting out and doing those Hollywood meetings and having that lean in where you assert yourself without the ratchet kind of coming out, that is a challenge when you don't have that feeling of belonging and at minimum sort of middle class to upper middle class.
right,
it
right.
it really, and I think this is something when we talk about diversity, that it's an invisible barrier that people don't consider. How you have a conversation, the ebb and flow of conversations. I mean,
Absolutely.
I grew up, everything was very loud. Two people were
Sure.
having a discussion on the street and everybody would come out and everybody would, like, they'd all have their opinions about it. And as an adult, somebody who came from this little tiny island off the coast of British Columbia had that experience and they moved to Toronto and they felt exceptionally intimidated. And I'm like, oh
Mm,
no, you just had like a different kind of island experience right there. But
sure.
this would not be something that would be intimidating for me. It was terrifying for them. And so your mom, bless her, really gave you something important in terms of success.
It's
And
enormously important to. I didn't understand. I was miserable as an adolescent and a teenager. Like I just was not very happy because I was sort of living between these two realities,
I can relate to
basically.
that as well. Yeah,
And
because,
I
yeah.
was constantly ashamed about being working class because I had friends that were getting luxury cars at 16, right? Like, so, you sort of feel like, wow, I don't know if I'm ever going to actually succeed in life because apparently the game has been won and lost at 16 years old, right? Um,
Yeah, you do get that feeling. I mean, coming out of high school and realizing that music in the 90s extended beyond like Beanie Man
right.
was a bit of an eye, cuz I mean grunge was this whole, I was aware of it, listened to Nirvana, Pearl Jam and stuff like that, but I didn't realize that was the paradigm of
Hmm.
music. And it does give you this, an outsider perspective is useful to a point, but when you're coming in and having to close a deal, um and if you've got any advice for this, like, please, like, this I think would help a lot of people.
Oh yeah, sure. Well,
Going in and having this headspace of, I belong here, my ideas are valid, these people are interested in talking to me, they're not going to throw me out if I say one wrong thing.
right, right.
How do you mentally prepare for that, coming, since you sort of understand that it's not quite othering, but you're caught between two worlds. You're kind of, ugh.
Well, you sort of one thing I always do whenever I take a meeting with someone is I look for a common denominator at the beginning of the meeting. So this is actually just a rapport, tidbit. So if you go into someone's office for the first time, have a look around. Generally, they will have something in their office that you can relate to. Bring it up, start the conversation there, right? Don't start a conversation with the business at hand. Say, like if I'm wearing, a Detroit Lions shirt, right? Now, I'm not a huge football fan, but I know a little bit about it. If you know a little bit about something, you say, "Oh yeah, I was a big Barry Sanders fan growing up, or I used to do this, or I used to play that team all the time in Madden or whatever." If they have a poster or something on their wall of a thing that you recognize, go ahead and start there. Build rapport. Build the conversation from commonality. That's the best way to get people to lower their defenses a little bit and then
Yes.
realize like, oh, okay, we're on the same page, we're on the same vibe,
It's
right?
that trust thing you were talking about earlier.
Right. It makes meetings so much easier because you're sort of breaking down the barrier, not only the professional barriers of gatekeeper person seeking to enter kingdom, but also the class differences or the racial differences or the gender differences. Um, So that's the first kind of pragmatic note. The philosophical note is I've rarely been in a room where someone didn't want to have a great experience meeting me,
Okay.
right? It's so when I was growing up, because I was constantly ashamed of not having as much money as all the kids that I went to high school with, I was sort of an angry kid.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah, I
you
can relate
express
to that
that
a lot. Yeah.
in like different ways, right?
Yeah.
So I was acting out a lot and building up barriers around myself, mostly to protect myself from feelings of inequity, feelings of being invalid, right? Shame. And then I went to NYU, and it sort of got worse because everyone there seemed to have enough money to make movies all the time, and I was just worried about meals and lodging and all of that.
Yes.
Um, so that was a particularly difficult period. And so I left NYU not in a great headspace.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this idea that I constantly had to validate myself. I had to validate my intelligence. I had to validate the reason I had to be there. I was constantly trying to show everyone I was smart, I was talented, I was going to do this. And I was engaging things in a way that was off-putting to people because they were wondering, why are you like this? Like, you're cool, man. Like, you're cool. Like, I don't know what happened before, but we're just
You
having a conversation, like,
you had to
and
bring down the nerd rage. You had to stop using fire spells and start using cold spells, sort of
start
thing.
using cold spells, start using wind.
Yeah.
And I had to learn how to treat every experience as a first experience and not a chain of experiences that will give me the same result, right? So, I had to go into these situations just telling myself, I've never met this person before. They don't know me. There's no reason this will be a negative experience, right? This could be a very positive experience. And I lost my adversarial relationship with the world, basically, around in my mid 20s. I think it kind of fled from me, and I was much better off. So I just suggest to people that, one, anything you're going through, millions of other people are going through it at the same time. So you're never really alone. You can feel alone, especially as a creator. You
Yeah.
can feel alone. You can feel isolated. We all go through that. It's just a universal thing. Two, don't always expect adversity. Be prepared to manage adversity, but don't go into a situation expecting it because you might often not see an opportunity because you're worried about a threat.
You're
You know,
tuned to see that.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
You've
And
got that
that's
perspective, and
yeah,
it'll radiate, off of you a little bit, and then people will get a little defensive, and then now you're in this cycle that's fulfilling this idea, self-fulfilling prophecy of, they're not going to listen to me, they're not going to take my work seriously, they're not,
mhm.
you know, and uh, letting go of that really sort of kind of helped me out. And I've had a lot of negative experiences. I've had people that told me to quit 10 years ago because I had no talent. You know,
Yeah, I
people.
got the sense you were glossing over those in your sort of origin story earlier. It's like,
Oh
wow,
yeah,
yeah.
no, no, I had a lot of headwind and resistance to wanting to be a creator. I mean,
Well,
I'm
even
I'm
even
not
in
a.
the pitch process, you have to take at least 9 meetings, 10 meetings to get one thing even to the next step.
Oh
It's take
yeah,
the shot, take the shot, take the shot. It's like sports that way. You can't score if you don't shoot. But
it's very true, and so I don't worry so much about the ultimate result. I just try to invest myself into every stage of the process, right? And you do have an advantage when you go into these rooms. They're looking for sorcerers, right? They're looking for Jedi. You're meeting with people who don't have the Force. They're senators, you know? They want
yeah.
the best for Coruscant, but they're looking for someone who's in tune with the living Force.
Yeah.
So you have an opportunity to demonstrate that with your understanding, with your patience, with your knowledge, with the spark and the energy of creativity,
Mhm.
because that is magical and charismatic to people whenever they see it. And the most important thing any creator can do when they're meeting people and pitching and doing all of this stuff is radiate the energy of creativity. You know, demonstrate your excitement and your passion about not only what you're doing, but about stories in general, if it's stories that you're pitching. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I've met people along the way and, just had like a random conversation with someone at a party or something, and they've become good friends because I'm always trying to sort of, let people into how passionate I am about their sort of thing. Like I met James Waugh from Blizzard
Oh, cool.
socially one time, and we're just like talking about stories and like vibing about stories, and I wasn't necessarily going to turn into anything specific, but now he's a good friend of mine, and
Right.
and now we talk, and so there's a lot to love about it. But because as creators we get scars, a lot of them, on our path, it's important to um, not let yourself be defined by your scar tissue, right? And the scars aren't like a video game. You can't see them. They don't know. People often forget how hard you had to travel to get to that office, because you're
Yeah.
there, because you're in that office, right? So it's always a matter of empathy, and trying to sort of get on the frequency of the people that you're speaking to, build rapport with them when you can, and remember that no one is working against you. You know, everyone's just working against the same enemy, and that's failure, and they're all trying to figure out a way through it. And I also just tell people, be very careful about what you do on social media. Um,
Yeah.
and this is like just a very practical point, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
No, it really is true. And I think people know it here.
hmm
Be careful on social media, but they don't internalize it here.
right, right,
And I
and
mean, yeah, one of the greatest crucibles I'm actually grateful for now is a bunch of people on 4chan and 8chan going through every tweet I ever wrote 3 times looking for
sure,
dirt because they were determined I was a fake gamer. I was some sort of,
right.
spy for the whatever. I don't know, this big bad that is apparently ready to destroy games. But they found 2 things that if twisted out of context could be considered. But I'm like, you know what? I must be doing okay if they put all that effort in and came out with so few, hand grenades in my lap.
Well, anger is a false prophet, right? Anger
Mm-hmm.
is just fear in a little black dress, right? But the truth of anger is fear.
Oh,
We are
I agree. Yeah,
we're angry when we feel threatened, and we respond with anger to protect ourselves. So, when the negativity of social media comes at a person, it's because something about a person is threatening something they feel is precious to them.
that's right.
And regardless of whether or not that's true, and usually it's absolutely not true, they're actually not being threatened.
But the feelings are
Uh,
valid. Like people are
the feelings
legitimately
are there.
feeling that way. Yeah, no, I
The,
completely agree. Yeah.
the feelings are there, and a lot of people feel like their ethics are under attack, that what they like is being judged as evil and wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone's trying to sort of take it away from them, like Anita's trying to take the controller out of my hand and all of that. And it's just not true. It's just with gaming, especially, I think, because for a long time gaming happened in a
In
bit
the
of a cultural
dark.
bubble,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And it wasn't subject to all of the commentaries and the think pieces, and the folks coming in and rendering opinions on things. But every other medium has been like this for 100 years. Music has always been like this, right?
Yeah,
They've been
I went
they've been
through
trying to
with
kill. Yeah, go ahead.
rap. I went through,
Rap,
well, it's
right?
the same people like Jack Thompson
Jack
went from going
Thompson,
after True Live Crew
right?
to going after video games. It's the
Tipper
same
Gore,
Tipper
right?
Gore. It's the same
Same
people.
thing,
Yeah.
same thing. And Walmart won't carry the rap album in there. I was
Yeah, they
listening
wouldn't
to
carry Public Enemy.
I was a huge Public Enemy fan as a kid, angry kid. I was a huge Public Enemy guy. I had the medallion and everything, and you couldn't get that there. And they were trying to burn your records, or whether you were listening to metal like Judas Priest and oh, it makes you commit suicide if you listen to the Judas Priest record. It's always sort of been like this,
Yeah.
and I think gamers are now uh, uh, just sort of suddenly getting a little more attention from a lot of places that, frankly, they trade in controversy. I mean,
Yeah,
we're
the hot
in a
take
clip
writing. Yeah.
culture, so you get a lot of hot take writing. You get a lot of opinion that's deliberately uninformed, so that they will get mad and then respond, and then they get more clicks, and the conversation happens, and the advertisers are happy. So, um, we who play video games, we're good people.
Hmm.
Like going to a GameStop, is still a good experience until I buy something and then they upsell me for 10 minutes. But like the actual the register experience is awful. But
Mine is a completely different register experience, Brian. I have to prove I'm playing the games myself.
that's funny.
It's
That's
become
sure.
less, but God of War 2, God of War 2, God of War 3, one of the God of War game sequels. I will never
Oh,
forget this. The
yeah.
guy quizzed me to prove. It was like, "Are you buying this for yourself?" Yeah. Are you sure? Is somebody behind me doing that? What? Yeah.
He was flirting or something and just
No,
didn't
it
know what
was
he was
right
doing.
after those restrictions on retailers had come in. And
Oh,
he
yeah.
said, "Cuz if it's not for you, I can't sell it to you. If you're buying this for a kid, I can't sell it to you." And I'm like, did my ovaries suddenly appear on my forehead? Like, mostly, I said, "No, man, I love Kratos. He's great. You know that scene where he stabs the Cyclops in the eye and like the eye pops out and it's all bloody." And then he kind of, "Oh, okay, she's played
Right.
the games." But it was like that. What is your name? What is your quest? What is the airspeed velocity of an air-laden swallow? And if you say I don't know once, psh,
Right.
and
Yeah.
now it's, do you want to buy the protection? Do you want to buy the gold card? Do you? But
Right.
it they still don't believe my husband when he goes in to buy games and they start talking to him. And he says, "Don't talk to me. I
Right.
I just play them. I don't know anything about them. Talk to her." And you see this sort of, "Is this for real? Look." And I try to see it as a compliment, but at the same time I'm like, I should not still be a unicorn in this world. It does not um reflect my reality. And the problem is now, like, a lot of the female gamer friends I have, they don't go into the stores. They're either doing
Right.
direct download. I mean, comics are the same way. I i hate to say I don't miss the comic book store experience, because that
I've heard that from a lot
awkwardness.
of people.
Yeah, like, I walk in and all of a sudden all the conversation stops, from goes from a 6 volume to a 3.
Really?
And I'll be
Wow.
looking, and obviously some shops are better than others, but you immediately feel that, when you're playing ball hockey
Yeah,
on
of
the
course.
street, and a car comes by and everybody yells car, and you move the net, you step away and you let the
Right.
car go by. Well, in the
Just
comic
stop
book
playing the
shops,
games. Yeah.
it's girl, and they all put away what they're doing, and let the girl go past and make your purchase, and then you hear them resuming their conversation as I'm walking out the door.
That's funny. That's
And
funny.
it is funny. The first few times it happened, I was like, I just wanted to reach
Sure.
across I grabbed that, Kevin Smith wannabe guy behind the counter and just listen, you scorpion the shit out of him, like. But now it's just, I find it kind of sad and funny at the same time, because just, I mean, cosplay should let people know there's plenty of different types of people that love this stuff. But then the assumption is, oh, you don't really play the game, so you don't really buy the books.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only after you kind of know who Jeff Johns is, or Frank Miller is, or Alan Moore is, or Grant Morrison, or, I say I'm a Frank Cho fan, all of a sudden the conversation changes completely, because, okay, then we can
Right.
relax, because that's one of those artists that women aren't supposed to like, for really no good reason. It's
Right.
just certain creators get branded as certain things, and they'll be doing their thing, and it's that whole thing about looking for the negative. If people are looking for the negatives in someone's work, everything they do to oppose that just gets filtered out. And then the one time they're back on that script, oh, you see, nobody cares
Right.
that Frank Cho is doing Wonder Woman covers based on his love of Baroque art. They care about the silly parody covers he did with Power Girl and Wonder Woman and Spider Woman.
Well, there's a dark trend in social media where well-intentioned people can very quickly become witch hunters uh, a lot, and it just reduces the landscape of conversation. And not to get too Sargon here, because I don't
Hmm.
agree with a lot of what Sargon says, but I do agree with the battlefield of ideas that he speaks about,
Yes. Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And then good ideas, they rise to the top, right? And I think we have to be a culture in all facets of art
Hmm.
where we can engage diverse opinions respectfully,
Hmm.
we can listen to each other, and we can let the good ideas rise without the labels coming in nearly instantly, right? Because the worst thing is to get people to feel like they can't talk about something. So if there's a person who, let's just take, like race, right, the hot button issue, right? So there's a person who feels uncomfortable with how they feel about race, right? Maybe they've thought about it, maybe they had an experience and they wanted to have a dialogue. You want that person to feel comfortable talking to me about it without
Yes.
getting attacked if they use the wrong word or the wrong
Yes.
term, right? Because if the instant result is, oh, you said something problematic, now we have to tar and feather you, for doing that,
Yeah.
then no one talks to anyone anymore. And we remain in echo chambers and culture isn't moving forward, right?
I
And
I really struggled with this with Beyonce's Lemonade
sure.
visual novel because I love the shit out of that thing, and I had a very profound reaction to it, and I wanted to write about it, but I'm like, oh man, how am I going to do this? Because the
Right.
stuff I love about it is that whole Creole Texas fusion she did.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get into that thorny issue of this isn't yours, you can't talk about it.
Well, and that harkens back to the idea of fear, right?
Hmm.
There's, a lot of black women feel marginalized in society. They feel
For good
just
reason,
for,
to
for
be
good reasons,
fair.
right?
Yeah.
No, I mean it's justifiable. I'm not saying it's not. I mean it's very difficult when you are kind of constantly sort of an afterthought. You're marginalized a lot. You have to search for positive role models, and those positive role models have a very, very narrow path. Um, so Beyonce's Lemonade is affirming in such a powerful way that people seek instantly to protect it, and,
Yeah.
and protect their experience of it. And I completely understand that.
I do too. I
But
absolutely do.
simultaneously, your experience with something will never be changed by someone else's experience of something unless you allow it to be.
Hmm.
You can cherish whatever you cherish, and then look at, like what's the guy with the strange Greek last name, Yiannopoulos, Milo,
Yeah.
right? Like I don't agree with him most of the time. I think he's pretty pompous, but I'll watch his stuff and engage it, and it doesn't change how I feel about a thing, but I like getting different sort of thought,
Hmm.
diverse kind of thought, um, because we're stronger than I think we give ourselves credit for, and our experiences with things are valid, right? No one can invalidate your affirming experience with a thing, with an opinion, unless you allow them to. You have to give them permission to do that, and
Well, they
eh,
can break you. I mean, I think a lot of
sure.
the things that happen on social media right now is an attempt to break someone from an opinion. And as, somebody who's experienced that attempt, like some message board decides you are guilty of wrongthink and
Right.
starts really flinging some hurtful destructive stuff your way, trying to get you to change your mind. You
Mhm.
have to start wondering, is it worth it? And then you start, any empathic person starts going, am I wrong? Have I done something wrong here? Is was what I did actually hateful? And that self-doubt does start to creep in because of the you try to have a conversation with some people and they are so invested in just screaming at you as
Right. Right.
opposed to like, whoa, why do you feel I'm a transphobe? Why do you feel I'm a racist? Why do you feel like I have internalized misogyny? You have to give me some tangible details for me to understand this, as opposed to just telling me over and over and over again I'm jealous of Anita Sarkeesian. You know?
Well, the truth of something is, if you're sincerely invested into a cause,
Hmm.
then you are always trying to build a larger coalition around your cause. right? So if you're sincerely invested into these thoughts, you're not going to attack people that think differently than you because you're trying to build more bridges. And there's a huge difference between someone who's really passionate about the ideas and believes in the philosophy and the ideology
Hmm.
of something, and then someone who gets self-esteem from being part of a community and having some agency, right? And so
Oh.
uh, I always just search out, who really wants to build a bridge to me and help me understand where you're coming from more, because those are the people that are genuinely invested into the cause, you know?
See, I feel on social media and even in regular media, I mean, let's face it, we take our dialogue cues from these chat shows, these panel
Sure.
shows on news that are designed to have fireworks, you know,
Boxes, talking heads, and
and
arguments.
and
Let's
they
let's play
don't
hardball, right?
you don't put Van Jones on a show with a Donald Trump guy who thinks the Democratic Party race baits unless
Right.
you're expecting stuff to go down. You know, CNN
Right.
gets exactly what they want when they do that because just looking at these guys, they know them well enough that they know they're going to be there and sparks are going to fly. And so I feel that because it's all that soundbite, get it in that theater of verbal warfare, that when we actually come to talking to each other about difficult issues, we're replicating that and we go to that structure of somebody says something, another person jumps in specifically to say, here's why you're wrong instantly. And they're missing the step of, why do you feel that way? Because a cable news segment doesn't have enough time for why do you feel that way? It's point,
Right.
counterpoint. We must show both sides.
Well, and then intelligent dialectic, it reveals the complexity of issues. And complexity is something that's harder to stomach than you're wrong and evil because you're wrong, and I must slay the evil, and that's the dynamic I'm living in. I live in these polemics, and it's just not like that. Like I going to the filmmaking example,
Mm-hmm.
someone asked me once what film did I think was the most impactful for race relations, and I said Lethal Weapon. And they were like, well, why? Because racists actually watch Lethal Weapon.
Yep.
And they get the Trojan horse message of Roger Murtaugh and his family, and they might walk out of that movie thinking about Black Americans differently.
Guys like you don't die on toilets.
Right. Racists don't watch Spike Lee movies.
They don't do the right thing.
Anti-Semites
No.
don't watch Schindler's List,
No.
right?
They
So a
do
lot
now though, but they do it to tear it apart.
do it, they're not going to receive it, right? If they're going
Yeah.
to, they're engaging it to tear it apart. So, you know, for me, it's always important to give people your point of view in a way they can accept and adopt it, and live through it without constantly being confronted with how wrong they are about
Mhm.
everything all the time. So,
Mhm.
like, Nelson Blake, the comic book artist, and I were creating this book called Romulus, and it has a female protagonist, and she fights this ancient Roman secret society that's controlled civilization since the days of the greatest days of Rome, basically. And
Mhm.
it's about speaking truth to power, and it's about underdogs and dealing with all of the ways that power and money affect us all negatively in a heightened comic book context. But we're doing it in a way where you don't have to believe what we may believe to enjoy the story. We're presenting it in emotional terms. And
Mhm.
Ashlar, the main character, she's not the female hero. She's a character on a quest that has adversity and has to overcome it to achieve a goal. And part of her experience as a human being is that she is a woman. But I really wanted people to be able to engage the material without being constantly aware of the gender dynamics, because that takes people out of the narrative, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I mean, that's what I love about, writers like Greg Rucka, that he
Sure.
combines so many othering factors. I remember talking to him about Batwoman, and he
Hmm.
said, she's a woman, that matters. She's ex-military, that matters. She's queer, that matters. They
Right.
all matter.
It all
They're
matters. It's all
Yeah.
It's all part
So
of what shapes and informs who that person is.
you get enough variables, like Nelson mentioned that the main character Romulus is a mixed race character as well.
Yes, she is.
You get enough variables in a character, and suddenly you stop getting this. What does this character believe as a woman? And I always have to do the Superman pose, like, as a woman.
Right.
I don't
Sure.
think anything as a woman. I don't react to anything as a woman. I react
right.
to things as an individual with individual experiences, that is. And everybody talks a good game about intersectionality, but we don't practice what we preach, you know? And this is what I like about the work I've consumed that you do, is you put so many variables into a character and into a narrative, and both are important. Because if the narrative doesn't have enough moving parts, well, yes, it's very much a character study.
Right.
But then you start getting archetype, and I know I'm going really deep, but when you start going archetype,
Right.
then you get into the all women think this way, and it's just not so.
Well, equality means that every character, regardless of their gender or their race, their religious background, sexual orientation, has the same narrative opportunity of experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want to be able to create a woman who's not likable, who may do bad things, because you need a villain in your story, right? You don't want to nobilize every character because then it just doesn't feel real. And what you're really broadcasting subconsciously is these folks need special treatment,
Yeah.
right? Like the white male character can do anything in the world. They can be bad, they can be good, they can be funny, they can get beat up,
Well, they can smoke
win,
pot and fart, you
they
know?
can do all that stuff.
Yeah.
But these other ones,
Yeah.
they need the special treatment. And you're broadcasting that there's an inherent inequity there. And I think it's really important to not seed people with that concept when they're consuming popular fiction, and let characters play across the spectrum of human experience, and not judge people because, oh, this guy, he has a female character in a story and she got hurt, so he's a misogynist, right? Like if I were to say, oh, I had this, this is a great scene I have, for Rey, where Kylo Ren in the sequel is going to snap all these boxes off of the wall and beat her with it and send her through a window, and then she's going to crawl back, and then they're going to lightsaber fight, and he's going to cut off her hand, right? There's like a visible, like, oh no, you can't do that.
But
like,
you
well,
just, that's what Luke Skywalker already did.
well, why can't I do that?
But
'Cause
that's
Daisy
the
Ridley is
problem.
awesome.
That's the problem
Daisy
with
can play
Rey.
those scenes, right?
Yeah, but that's the problem with Rey, Brian, is that they will only let her do things that have already been done because it's safer.
Well, I see the criticisms of Rey for sure. I think that one, we actually have very little Rey to look at, right? Like, we don't have 3 movies of Rey. We have, I don't know, like 50 minutes of this
Yeah,
character.
we're at the Star Wars
There's
of the
so-
and we didn't have a lot of Luke, Han, or Leia in the first Star Wars either.
There's
To be
so
fair, yeah.
little Rey that you can't Max Landis it and get your rainbow wig and then Mary Sue, Mary Sue, Mary Sue, because there's just not enough of her in the movie yet.
But
to
at
know
the
what
same
limits are.
time, she flies the Falcon. She gets to play with the lightsaber. She has the cool monster trash compactor style scene. She gets to do all the Star Wars things in one movie. And I think, again, they did overcompensate a little despite themselves. I really appreciate what they were trying to do, but I can't think of a notable flaw she has.
I think it might be the joining of sort of 2 different issues, right?
Yeah.
So one of them is, we're making a new Star Wars movie and we don't know if this is going to work. So we need to make a checklist of all of the things people like about Star Wars and then do that stuff.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. They were trying to throw so much at the wall.
We've got this new Jedi character. We need her to work. We haven't really done a female Jedi in Star Wars in the movies yet. We have a new actor.
Well, they were, but they were on screen for 3 seconds before they got killed.
Right. And most of them were aliens. Right?
Yeah.
And we have a new actor, and she's really awesome. And we need this movie to make a gajillion, billion, gajillion dollars because there's 17 more movies we have to make.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to always give them the feel good. And the feel good is the hero
Yeah.
wins. The hero wins. The hero wins. I think I do think that there was a sensitivity to making sure that the female character wasn't shortchanged in
I,
some way.
I
Uh,
agree with you, but because of that, we got Hermione Ripley Leia instead of Rey.
there's a bit of amalgaming kind of going on with Ray, but I have a lot of faith in it. One,
I do too.
Daisy Ridley is awesome. Like she's working really hard. I don't know if you follow her on Instagram or something, but
I
she's like lifting weights 3 hours a day in the gym. She's crazy, right?
And she
She's
doesn't
awesome.
even need that because she's got such a glorious energy on screen for someone so young. I mean, she's got that spark
Yeah,
that
she's
you
really invested. Ryan Johnson is he's what was missing for me from Force Awakens was the crazy, right? Like all the Star Wars was there, but it was missing that layer of George Lucas insanity that would always come into Star Wars where something would happen and you're like, that's crazy. That thing doesn't make any sense, but it somehow works inside of Star
you,
Wars.
you know what the moment for me that was?
Hmm,
That giant pig hippo monster in the background of that one scene that they didn't really remark on.
sure,
He
sure.
was just kind
The
of
creatures were good.
there, but that you're right, that theater of the absurd element that Lucas kind of like, why is he a giant slug monster? Because he is.
Well, it's like, like Darth Maul is about as far from Darth Vader as you can get as a Sith villain. No one expected the Sith villain in the Phantom Menace to look like Satan in the desert with a double-bladed lightsaber.
but but
That's
he's
crazy.
but he's actually a pureblood Sith as
But he's
opposed to a
actually a
human
pureblood
being
Sith. That's,
trained
that's
in,
the thing.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. So he is
So,
actually the definitive Sith, and Anakin is
right.
not. Yeah.
So like Kylo Ren's design is a little too close to Vader for me. I know it's narratively motivated and all of that, but I feel like I don't know if you've seen like the Knights of Ren like sketches that were floating around online.
That's why I'm
I
giving it a chance because of
I think
that.
it's gonna
Yeah.
come. It's coming,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
they, it worked. They gave us a movie. Most people generally like it. There's goodwill around Star Wars movies again. I think that we're gonna start seeing some of the nutso come back into it.
And that
Um,
was the goal as well, I think, going in. Is they had to use a sports terminology again, run a clean race
mhm,
because the previous three films were not clean races. It was all the George Lucas nutso and not enough
right.
Spielberg and company making it coherent.
Well, I frankly think he's such a personal filmmaker and storyteller, Lucas, that he makes movies about what is on his mind at the time. And when he was making Star Wars, he was working up against the system. He had faith in the thing no one ever believed in, and he was just trying to get it through, right?
He
Trying to
was
keep the old guard of filmmaking alive through a difficult corporate period of filmmaking.
he was also making Flash Gordon and John Carter fan fiction, but he couldn't get the license. Like
Couldn't get the license,
it
right?
was an homage film. He wanted,
So
what was it?
it's
He wanted to make Flash Gordon?
Flash Gordon, I think
Yeah,
it was.
yeah.
So, it was very much kind of wrapped in those things. The prequel trilogy is still about where Lucas is as a person. That's why it starts off with taxes. That's why it starts off with corporate blockades because that is his universe now,
Well,
right?
that's a good
His
point.
the Palpatine story in the prequels is brilliant because that is where George Lucas lives right now in the halls of power. In how do you maintain your ethical sanctity when you are very rich and you can do all of these things and you have to maintain this kingdom. And so the Palpatine stuff is really really strong because that's where he is. I just feel he's so far removed from Anakin as a character that Anakin becomes an intellectual idea rather than something that had emotional investment because Lucas understands the ways and means of the Republic, the Senate, how insidious characters can infect power institutions and yield their will, how Order 66 can happen under your nose. And all that stuff is really fascinating to me. I think there's
Hmm.
a lot of really fascinating ideas there. It's just he's so far from the farm boy. I have a theory though. This is my radicalized theory. Do you want to hear my 30-second radicalized prequel trilogy theory?
Absolutely.
Anakin Skywalker is black. Anakin Skywalker is symbolic of the black male experience in a lot of ways.
See,
And I
I feel
think
that
because
way about Kratos and God of War, so I'm with you here.
Lucas has, adopted black children. You know, he understands that Anakin comes from a single parent home. He comes from the working class. You know, he's in a semi-oppressed system. He enjoys himself with the things that you enjoy in the working class, driving your cars real fast and all of that.
But he's using it to get out as well.
But he's using it to get out. And he can't get out not because there's no space for him to run, but because if he gets out, then he'll die, right? Like something will happen to him.
Hmm.
He is visited by sort of upper class, like elite traditionalists that see value within him. And they bring him into a system that doesn't quite accept him because he is not of them. He constantly feels like he has to be twice as good as they are to get half as much. And because he's in that place, he's manipulated by other forces that take advantage of that anger and then turn that against him. And then he becomes imprisoned by it ultimately. So I think there's a lot of the black experience in Anakin Skywalker. You know, that's why even though they're flawed films, I still have a real personal connection to the prequel trilogy because I really feel like I identify with Anakin.
Well, even
And
Darth
so
Vader, even Darth Vader in the first three films, voiced by James Earl Jones.
it's
I mean,
voiced by James Earl Jones.
you're not pulling this out of your ass here.
Right. I mean, it's evidentiary, right? There's some stuff that's there, and so Lucas is a brilliant man. You know, he really is a guy that's firing on all cylinders all of the time, and I think sometimes it's better when you maintain the macro position and let people manage the micro.
Yes, I agree. His world building
Right. I
is
mean, it's peerless, right? Like he just knows what Star Wars is and how this works mythologically, you know, anthropology, the philosophy, psychology, it's all there, you know.
and
And
I
so,
appreciate that there are certain things that he doesn't want the public to know. Like what is Yoda's race? You know, what is Yoda's alien species? I like the fact that he knows,
right.
but Yoda's Yoda. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wish more creators drew lines that way. And we're like, no, we're not going to make Weapon X Weapon 10 in
Right.
X-Men. You know, he's going to be
Right.
Weapon X. Part of Wolverine's tragedy is he's the only one. He is somebody where up until they changed it all, no one could really understand what he was going through.
Sure.
Now that's gone. And I think part of the reason the character resonated with so many people is that there was that lone survivor meets Frankenstein meets, amnesiac quality to that
Right. Right.
character. And now he's significantly less special
You
because
mean because of Laura?
because of the whole, first of all, cyclic nature of his history. There's always a woman, there's always another guy, something always ends tragically.
Sure.
Um, and then the there was something about going back to POV again. There was something about Logan not knowing his past and us not knowing his past that
Mm,
created
mm,
that intimacy that you
mm.
talked about earlier. And I felt that I would have preferred that origin, Wolverine origin, became like, you know, that when they introduced the Red Hood
Right.
origin to Joker, and then at the end of the whole book, it's, well, it could have happened anyway, that way, sort of thing.
Sure.
They
Sure.
bailed out of it because if you liked it, great. If you didn't, that's okay. It's just, I love DC's
Right.
Elseworlds because it allowed people to experiment with these characters without um radically affecting canon. Now I know radical canon shakeups sell books now, but
Right. Right.
I
Well,
liked,
definitives are difficult.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
some people do them very
You know, like
well.
when you sure.
Yeah.
I think it's a matter of necessity, right? I think it's a matter of is there something gained by objectively defining this character's origin? Is that going to add to the character or is it going to reduce the character? You know, and I think it's a very very difficult thing to kind of do. I mean, I like mystery about it. Like
I do
I
too.
don't need to know everything about every character. I because I live in the moment of the story. I don't necessarily live in the backstory
Well,
of
and
what
that's
things
that
are.
engagement. That's that interactivity you have where you know the nurturing, the healing element of comics for me growing up is you told your own stories
Hmm.
between those books, right? You had this very short story that only came out once a month, and so it stayed with you, and you started imagining um, your own stories within that
Hmm.
world because they were spaced out. I mean, that's how I learned to tell stories as a
Right.
kid. I started
Sure.
imagining myself as Spider-Man and myself as Lion-O, and my because there were so few, relatively so few Thundercat stories.
Right.
But I just loved the worlds, and I started telling my own stories and imagining what it would be like to be a Triffid. And I always identified with the monster. I loved E.T. I loved Yoda, R2D2. The
Well, that's one of the I think the unfortunate consequence of transmedia storytelling is
Mhm.
that every part of the timeline gets turned into content now, even the implied timeline. So if there's any mystery space in a narrative, there has to be a trilogy of films about it, or there has to be a mobile game that will explore this thing, and then you've sort of mapped out the mansion of the IP in a way that can reduce the experience because everything is sort of defined for you. You've taken the mystery away. One of the things I love about Batman is he's like Jesus, right? Because between the ages of 13 and 30, we don't really know what the hell Bruce Wayne was doing, right?
You're so
You know?
right, and this is the thing that causes me to glance off Gotham.
Right, because I don't know. I don't know.
I'm just like, this is an Elseworld. This is not,
Right,
because I keep trying to figure out, how
right,
does this fit into Batman canon? How is this a story of how he becomes Batman? Because in
right.
Smallville, to me, Smallville mostly was the story of how Lex Luthor became the character we knew.
Became the villain Lex Luthor, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Not
He's my
not
favorite. Michael Rosenbaum is still my favorite Lex Luthor.
so good. So good. I
Yeah.
loved him to death. And he was great as the voice of the Flash too. But yeah, I agree with you. I did feel like that, because that's right when you start reading comics as a kid and you can start imagining your sort of adolescent Batman. You can tell your own story of how he kind of came to be. And the
Right.
reality is, the story is so outlandish that no story of how he became Batman would really satisfy.
Right.
It really is, step one, collect underpants, step three, profit. You know, Getting a
Right.
step two for Batman is very difficult because you have to embrace the nonsense elements of the character. And people get very defensive. Whoa, whoa, no, Batman could happen.
Well, you do, and and a writing principle is you want to write the story about the most important time for the character.
Hmm.
So if that time hasn't been used, there might be a reason for that because that's not the richest story space.
That's right.
The richest story space lives here. That's why the story starts here. And the backstory stuff, that's interesting and it's interesting to speculate about. But there's a reason why you choose to start a story when you started. There's a reason why Shakespeare chose to start Hamlet with Hamlet being that age,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. That
Um,
opening scene. That's what Tarantino does well.
'Cause you're watching
Tarantino's,
the most important part of a character's life, you
yeah,
know.
that is one of his real strengths. That
So
and the most important beginning may not necessarily be the most important beginning chronologically.
absolutely,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely, because you want to tell, and this is like for anyone out here who's listening, who's telling stories. You're watching this and you're a storyteller. My point of advice is make sure the story you're telling is the most important moment in your character's life. Right, start there and tell the story of that moment. If the story happens in 2 hours, then it's a story that happens in 2 hours. Like 24, there was, I don't know, umpteen seasons of
We
the
need
most
to go
important day in
now.
Jack
Yeah,
Bauer's
yeah,
life,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's what's really important in a lot of the transmedia IP. I meet with people and they have these pitches and they start their pitches talking about how the whole universe of the story, is really great, and that's cool, but bring people in to the specific story.
You need
The
to call
most
me Ishmael.
right, you need to
Yeah.
call me Ishmael,
Yeah.
like think back to your Melville and make sure that although you can present the potential of what happens outside of the core story that you want to tell, make sure your core story is what you're highlighting, moving forward, and asking people to get engaged with. and then the rest of this will get engagement as that core story finds an audience, whether it's the viewer or the executive or what have you. But if you just come in with sandbox and characters, then you might find it hard to get traction because people don't know where to invest their passion.
Brian, this has been amazing. We've talked for 2 hours, so I'm
Is
gonna
this all
let
right?
you.
Like, is this useful for you? Like,
You're so Hollywood right now. Is this all right? Is it you just dropped 1,000 truth bombs and
like
now
I
you're
listen to
looking at like
myself,
the
so I,
smoking
I,
wreckage
I
of
never
awesome?
know.
And
I
it's like,
never
was
know.
that all right? You're so Hollywood, man. Thank you so much, Brian. How do people check out your work? Like, where can they find you online?
Okay, it's really easy. Well, one, my Twitter is my name. That's at Brian Edward Hill, just the way it's spelled. So you can find me there. I'm always there. I write a book called Postal that is out monthly from Top Cow in your local comic book store and on Comixology.
Yeah.
And my new book I'm creating with Nelson Blake is called Romulus. That book will be coming in October. And so for people who follow me on Twitter, at Brian Edward Hill, you'll be getting a lot of updates, a lot of content. Look out for that. It's a really cool book. It's about a cool character that fights an ancient Roman conspiracy in the modern day with a sword and ripped jeans. Can't miss that. So those things are there, and the rest of it is kind of online as it goes. But yeah, I always invite people to find me on Facebook or Twitter, or add me there. I like conversations. You can yell at me if you want, but I won't yell back. And I just love,
You need to take me as your Padawan about the not yelling back, Brian.
never yell back.
I need
never
some
yell
work
back.
on that.
I am the Obi-Wan Kenobi of Twitter.
Because sometimes you just have that great line. And I want to be Han Solo. I don't want to be Obi-Wan on Twitter. No, I want to be Leia.
My beats and I rap like as a hobby.
Okay.
So all my Eminem, all my Jay-Z and all that fury that comes out in my tracks that I never really play for anybody. So I can be nice and diplomatic in the social media sphere.
So you've got a Franz Kafka style stash of absurdist stories that Nelson's going to publish against your wishes after you die.
I do. I have a library of crazy content that if I'm significant enough that people will care about in my passing, trust me, there is plenty of stuff that hasn't gotten out there. So, I'll be around for a while, I suppose.